In 1985, he had a daughter with a tail. See how she is now, after 39 years. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. What if the greatest test of a father's love wasn't a moment of grand heroism, but a quiet, prolonged war, fought in the sterile hallways of a hospital? What if the enemy wasn't a disease, but a doctor's ambition? In 1985, a man named Arthur Jensen held his newborn daughter for the first time, and his world tilted on its axis. She was perfect, from her tiny clenched fists to the soft tuft of hair on her head. But when the nurse turned her over, a collective gasp sucked the air from the room. There, at the base of her spine, was a small, perfectly formed tail. It was no bigger than his thumb, covered in the same soft, downy skin as the rest of her body. The doctor's initial words were a blur of medical jargon, a storm of syllables that meant nothing and everything all at once. Sacrococcygeal teratoma, spina bifida occulta, vestigial appendage. To Arthur, a quiet man who fixed watches for a living, a man whose hands understood the delicate mechanics of time but not the complex machinery of the human body. These words were just noise. All he saw was his daughter Alara, and in that moment, a fierce primal protectiveness surged through him, a love so profound it eclipsed the shock and the fear. The world could label her, diagnose her, see her as an anomaly, but he saw only his child. The nurses whispered in the corner, their hushed tones a symphony of pity and morbid curiosity. The air, once filled with the joy of new life, grew heavy with clinical assessment. This was the opening scene of a battle Arthur never knew he would have to fight, a battle for his daughter's dignity against a world, and one man in particular, who saw her not as a miracle, but a mistake. You won't believe how this humble father took on the medical establishment, and what became of his little girl, Alara, 39 years later. The story of what happened next would become a quiet legend, a testament to the fact that sometimes, the most powerful force on earth is a parent who simply refuses to be dismissed. The journey from that delivery room in 1985 would be long and fraught with a tension that could snap the strongest of spirits. But Arthur Jensen was about to discover a resilience he never knew he possessed, a strength forged not in a crucible of fire, but in the unwavering love for a daughter born just a little bit different. The name that would come to dominate their lives arrived with the chilling authority of a judge entering a courtroom. Dr. Alistair Finch. He didn't walk into the room. He made an entrance. His suit was immaculately tailored, a stark charcoal gray that seemed to absorb the light. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile when he offered it didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. He held a clipboard like a scepter, the physical manifestation of his power. Arthur, still in the same clothes from the day before, felt small under his gaze, a simple watchmaker, suddenly facing the god of this sterile white domain. "Mr. Jensen," Dr. Finch began, his voice smooth but devoid of any real warmth. He didn't ask how Arthur was feeling. He didn't inquire about the mother's recovery. He went straight to the subject, the anomaly, the case. "I've reviewed your daughter's preliminary charts. It's a fascinating presentation of a caudal appendage, a genuine human tail, if you will." He said the words human tail with a detached academic relish, as if discussing a rare butterfly he intended to pin to a board. Arthur just nodded, his throat tight. He clutched the edge of the visitor's chair, his knuckles white. Dr. Finch paced the small room, his expensive leather shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum. "Now the primary concern here is twofold. First, the underlying neurology. We need to ensure it's not tethered to the spinal cord. Second, and frankly, just as important, are the psychosocial implications." He paused, letting the weight of the jargon settle on Arthur. "Imagine her in school, Mr.
Jensen."
The ridicule, the ostracization. We have a duty not just to her physical health, but to her future social and emotional well-being. This deformity must be corrected, swiftly and decisively. The word deformity struck Arthur like a physical blow. He looked over at Alara sleeping in her bassinet, her tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. Deformity. He saw only beauty. "What does—" Finch stopped pacing and turned to face him, adopting a look of strained patience. "It means surgery, of course. A complete resection. I've already begun planning the procedure. It's intricate, certainly, but I've performed far more complex operations. I intend to make a small incision, dissect the appendage from the coccyx and ensure there are no neural connections. We'll send it to pathology, of course. I'll be publishing a paper on this. It's a remarkably rare case, and the surgical community will be very interested." There it was. The truth. tucked neatly behind a curtain of feigned concern. A paper, fame, a stepping stone. Arthur felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This wasn't about Alara's well-being. It was about Dr. Finch's career. Is it dangerous? Arthur asked. The most important question in the world. Finch waved a dismissive hand. All surgery carries inherent risks, Mr. Jensen. Anesthesia, infection. But leaving it is far more dangerous, socially speaking. We are saving her from a lifetime of humiliation. The arrogance was breathtaking. He had already decided. He was not consulting the father. He was informing him. The conversation was a formality, a box to be ticked on a pre-op checklist. But Arthur, the quiet watchmaker, felt something inside him begin to tick, a mechanism of defiance winding itself tight. He looked from the doctor's smug face to his daughter's innocent one. This man would not use his child as a specimen. The pressure began subtly, then escalated with methodical precision. Dr. Finch, it seemed, was an expert in psychological warfare. The day after their initial meeting, a nurse arrived with a stack of forms, a clipboard heavy with consent waivers and legal disclaimers. Dr. Finch asked me to have you sign these, Mr. Jensen, she said, her tone professional but firm. It's just the standard preoperative paperwork. Standard. The word felt wrong. Nothing about this felt standard. Arthur looked at the dense blocks of text, the lines of incomprehensible legal and medical terms. He saw words like nerve damage, paralysis, and unforeseen complications buried in the fine print. He pushed the clipboard away gently. I need more time to think, he said. The nurse's eyebrows shot up in surprise, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before she regained her composure. Sir, Dr. Finch has already scheduled the operating room. He's a very busy man. The implication was clear. Arthur's hesitation was an inconvenience to a very important person. The next day, Finch brought reinforcements. He arrived with 2 other doctors, a neurologist and a psychologist, both of whom deferred to him with an almost sycophantic reverence. They sat in a row opposite Arthur, a panel of judges assembled to deliver a verdict. The neurologist spoke of potential spinal tethering, with grave seriousness, though he admitted the initial scans were inconclusive. The psychologist, a woman with a soft voice and hard eyes, spoke of playground bullies and adolescent trauma, painting a grim picture of Alara's future if the stigma was not removed. They used words like proactive and essential intervention. It was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to overwhelm and intimidate. Mr. Jensen, Finch said, his tone now laced with condescension. We are the experts. We are all in agreement. This is what is best for your child. To delay is to be negligent. Negligent. The word was a spear, aimed directly at the heart of his love for his daughter. That night, Arthur sat in the dim light of his small apartment, the hospital's fluorescent glare finally behind him. He cradled Alara, who was home for the first time, in his arms. He traced the tiny curve at the base of her spine with his finger. It was just a part of her. He couldn't shake the feeling that Finch's urgency was driven by something other than pure medical necessity. In 1985, the internet was a distant dream. There was no WebMD, no online parent forums. To challenge a doctor's authority, you had to go to a library. The following afternoon, leaving a neighbor to watch Alara, Arthur went to the city's main branch. He found the medical section in a dusty, forgotten corner. The books were heavy and dense, filled with grainy black and white photos and language he couldn't penetrate. He felt a profound sense of hopelessness wash over him. How could he, a man who fixed gears and springs, ever hope to argue with a man like Alistair Finch? He was David facing Goliath, but Goliath had a medical degree and an army of specialists, and all David had was a slingshot of doubt. He returned home that evening feeling defeated, the weight of the hospital's authority pressing down on him. The surgery was scheduled in 2 days. Time was running out. It was in this fog of despair that a small ray of light appeared, so unexpectedly that Arthur almost missed it. Her name was Dr. Lena Hansen. She was a pediatric neurology fellow, new to the hospital and assigned to Dr. Finch's service. She was young, with bright, inquisitive eyes and a demeanor that was professional, yet kind, a stark contrast to Finch's imperious chill. From the periphery, she had observed the interactions between the celebrated surgeon and the quiet father. She saw how Finch spoke down to Arthur, how he dismissed his questions with arrogant impatience. But more importantly, she saw the look in Arthur's eyes. It wasn't ignorance or stubbornness, it was a deep, gut-wrenching fear. The fear of a parent terrified of making the wrong choice for his child. Dr. Hansen had been in medicine long enough to recognize the difference between a doctor guiding a patient and a doctor bullying one. Her concern crystallized during a conversation she overheard in the doctor's lounge. Finch was holding court with a few residents, a cup of coffee in his hand. The caudal appendage case is a gift, he'd said, a triumphant smirk on his face. The photos alone will be stunning. The New England Journal of Medicine is a certainty. It's not every day you get to write the definitive paper on such a rare presentation. He didn't mention Alara by name. He didn't speak of her future or her safety. He spoke of her as a case, a presentation, a gift to his career. The callousness of it settled like ice in Dr. Hansen's stomach. She knew the risks of the surgery Finch was proposing. While he presented it as straightforward, dissecting tissue so close to the base of the spine was incredibly delicate. A slip of the scalpel, a millimeter's misjudgment, could have lifelong consequences for bladder or bowel control, for motor function in the legs. Were those risks justified when the primary rationale seemed to be, as Finch put it, psychosocial, or, more accurately, professional ambition? Dr. Hansen believed in medicine that served the patient, not the physician. She felt a professional and ethical obligation to intervene, but how? She was a fellow, a subordinate. Directly confronting a surgeon with Finch's power and ego would be career suicide. He could have her dismissed from the program with a single phone call. The hospital administration revered him. He was a rainmaker who brought in prestige and grant money. She had to be clever. She had to be careful. She felt the same sense of helplessness that Arthur felt, but from the other side of the institutional wall. The system was designed to protect its own, to maintain the hierarchy. But watching Arthur Jensen, seeing his quiet dignity in the face of such arrogance, sparked a corresponding courage in her. She decided she could not stand by and let this happen. She would have to risk it. Dr. Hansen's intervention was a masterpiece of subtlety and plausible deniability. She knew that directly handing Arthur medical literature would be a flagrant breach of protocol, an act of insubordination. Finch could easily trace back to her, so she devised a different plan. The next morning, she knew Arthur would be in the hospital's small, dreary waiting area while his wife underwent a postnatal checkup. Dr. Hansen went to the hospital library and photocopied an article from a recent European pediatric journal. The article was titled, "Conservative Management of Benign Caudal Appendages, a Case Series and Literature Review." It argued that in the absence of clear neurological compromise, immediate surgical intervention was often unnecessary, and that a watch-and-wait approach, combined with routine monitoring, was a perfectly viable and much safer alternative. It was the direct counter-argument to Finch's aggressive stance. With the photocopied pages folded neatly in her lab coat pocket, she walked past the waiting area. She saw Arthur sitting alone, staring into space, the worry etched on his face. Accidentally, her pager beeped. She fumbled for it, and in the process, accidentally dropped a stack of files she was carrying. Papers scattered across the floor. As she knelt to pick them up, right beside Arthur's chair, the folded article slipped from her pocket and slid partially under his seat. "Oh, for goodness sake," she muttered. Gathering the rest of her files, she stood up, gave Arthur a quick apologetic smile, and hurried off down the hall, leaving the folded pages behind. She didn't look back. Her heart was pounding in her chest. It was a huge risk, but it was a risk she had to take. Arthur watched her go, then glanced down. He saw the corner of the paper peeking out from under his chair. He bent down and picked it up. He unfolded it. Conservative Management. The title was clear, direct. He began to read. The language was still medical, but it was simpler, more direct than the textbooks he'd tried to decipher. It spoke of cases just like Alara's, where surgery was delayed for years, or never performed at all, with no negative outcomes. It discussed the very risks Finch had so casually dismissed. For the first time since this ordeal began, Arthur held a piece of tangible hope in his hands. It was more than hope, it was ammunition. A seed of doubt had been planted, and now, it had been watered. When he next saw Dr. Finch making his rounds, Arthur was no longer just a passive, frightened father. He was armed with information. "Dr. Finch," he said, his voice steady, "I was reading about a watch-and-wait approach. Can you tell me why that isn't an option for Alara?" Finch stopped dead in his tracks, his professional smile faltering for a split second. He was visibly thrown. "Where did you hear that?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I've been doing some reading," Arthur replied calmly, not revealing his source. The mask of calm patience fell away from Finch's face, replaced by a flash of raw anger. "Mr. Jensen, you are not a doctor. A little bit of information is a dangerous thing. We are proceeding with the surgery as planned. It is what's best." But his tone was different now. It was defensive. Arthur's simple question had knocked a small chip out of his armor of infallibility. The battle was not over, but the dynamic had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. The confrontation Dr. Finch had hoped to avoid was now inevitable. Annoyed by Arthur's newfound, and in his view, misguided confidence, Finch decided to crush his resistance once and for all. He scheduled a formal meeting in a sterile, intimidating conference room. He invited a senior hospital administrator, a man named Mr. Davis, whose job was to mitigate risk and protect the hospital's reputation. The room was cold, the long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the grim faces of the participants. Dr. Finch stood at the head of the table, a slide projector set up beside him. It was a show of force, a theatrical display of authority. Arthur sat alone on the other side, looking smaller than ever in the cavernous room. But in his jacket pocket, he could feel the folded pages of the article Dr. Hansen had left for him. It felt like a talisman. Finch began his presentation. The first slide was a clinical, close-up photograph of Alara's back. Arthur flinched. It felt like a violation. Finch launched into his speech, his voice booming with self-assurance. He spoke of unacceptable disfigurement, of inevitable psychological scarring, of the clear and present danger of peer cruelty. He used loaded emotional language, a stark contrast to his usual clinical detachment. He was no longer just a surgeon, he was a salesman, and he was selling fear. To fail to act, he declared, his eyes boring into Arthur, then shifting to the administrator, would be a profound failure of our duty of care. Mr. Jensen's reluctance, while perhaps understandable from a layman's perspective, is endangering his daughter's future. He was painting Arthur as an obstacle, a negligent parent standing in the way of necessary medical care. Mr. Davies, the administrator, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He was a man of policies and procedures, and Finch was presenting a compelling, if one-sided case. The weight of the entire institution felt like it was pressing down on Arthur. He could feel his resolve starting to crumble, but then he thought of Alara. He thought of her perfect, tiny form, and the unconditional love he felt for her. He pulled the crumpled article from his pocket and laid it on the polished table. "Doctor," Arthur said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through Finch's monologue. "This article, from the European Journal of Pediatrics, suggests that conservative management is a viable option. It says that in cases without neurological signs, the risks of surgery can outweigh the benefits. My question is simple. Why is this surgery, this specific and invasive surgery, the only option you are presenting?" He slid the paper across the table. Finch glanced at it, his lip curling in a sneer. "An obscure European journal. Mr. Jensen, we are at the forefront of pediatric surgery here. We don't follow trends, we set them." But the administrator, Mr. Davies, picked up the article. He began to read. The certainty on his face began to waver, replaced by a flicker of doubt. The power in the room, once consolidated entirely at Finch's end of the table, had begun to diffuse. Arthur had stood his ground. He hadn't raised his voice. He had simply asked a question, a reasonable question, backed by evidence. And in that quiet moment of defiance, the entire foundation of Dr. Finch's authority began to crack. Just as Dr. Finch was formulating a dismissive rebuttal, the conference room door opened. Dr. Lena Hansen stood in the doorway, holding a patient file. "Excuse me, Mr. Davies, Dr. Finch," she said, her voice a perfect blend of deference and urgency. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Finch, you asked for the final MRI results for the Peterson case. It was a plausible excuse, a perfect piece of stagecraft." Finch waved her in impatiently, eager to get back to demolishing Arthur's argument. Yes, just leave it," he snapped. But Dr. Hansen didn't leave. She stepped fully into the room, her eyes briefly meeting Arthur's with a look of encouragement so fleeting that only he could have caught it. Then she turned to the administrator. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice now firm and clear, "forgive my intrusion, but as the pediatric neurology fellow assigned to this case, I feel I have an ethical obligation to speak." The room went dead silent. The air crackled with tension. Dr. Finch's face, already flushed with anger, began to turn a deep shade of crimson. "Dr. Hansen, this is highly inappropriate," he hissed. "Your opinion was not requested." But Mr. Davies, his interest piqued and his concern growing, held up a hand. "Let her speak, Alistair." It was the moment everything changed. The junior fellow, the subordinate, had been given the floor. Empowered, Dr. Hansen walked to the table. "Dr. Finch is an exceptional surgeon," she began, a clever, disarming opening. "But in his zeal to provide a solution, I believe he has overlooked recent and compelling data. The article Mr. Jensen has is just one of several. The current consensus in many leading pediatric centers, particularly for a morphologically simple appendage with no evidence of spinal tethering on imaging, which I must add, is the case with Alara, is to monitor. The surgery Dr. Finch is proposing is unnecessarily aggressive. There is a much less invasive procedure that can be performed to sever any potential fibrous bands without a full resection, and it can be done when the child is older, reducing the anesthetic risk. Or, we can simply monitor. The risk of major complications from his proposed surgery is, in my professional opinion, significantly higher than the risk of watchful waiting. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, puncturing the balloon of Finch's arrogance. She wasn't just offering an opinion, she was presenting a superior medical argument, calmly and rationally, exposing the flaws in his plan. She had called his bluff. Finch was sputtering, his composure completely shattered. This is outrageous. She's a fellow. She's misinterpreting the data. But his protests sounded hollow, desperate. Dr. Hansen had laid out the facts, and the facts were not on his side. Mr. Davies looked from the flustered, angry surgeon to the calm, confident young doctor. He looked at Arthur, whose expression was one of profound, dawning relief. The truth was out. The emperor had no clothes, and it had taken the courage of a quiet father and a principled young doctor to say it out loud. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Dr. Alistair Finch. The atmosphere in the conference room shifted from a tense debate to a formal inquiry in the span of seconds. Mr. Davies, the administrator, was no fool. He recognized the immense liability the hospital now faced. He saw a star surgeon who had seemingly put his own ambition ahead of patient safety, and a junior doctor who had just saved them from a potential malpractice lawsuit and a public relations nightmare. Alistair, Mr. Davies said, his voice now cold and official, I am postponing this procedure indefinitely. I am also convening an immediate emergency meeting of the Ethics Committee and the Surgical Review Board to re-evaluate this case. Dr. Hansen, I want a full report of your findings on my desk within the hour. Mr. Jensen, you have my sincerest apologies. It seems there has been a significant miscommunication regarding your daughter's care options. The word miscommunication was a masterful understatement, a corporate euphemism for what was clearly unethical and coercive behavior. Finch stood there, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His authority, so absolute just minutes before, had completely evaporated. He looked at Dr. Hansen with pure venom in his eyes, but she met his gaze with calm professionalism. He had been outmaneuvered and exposed. The subsequent investigation was swift and thorough. Dr. Hansen's report was meticulous, citing numerous studies and experts that supported a conservative approach. The Ethics Committee, now looking at Finch's record with fresh eyes, began to uncover a disturbing pattern. They found other cases where he had pushed for high-risk, high-profile surgeries when safer, less glamorous options were available. He had a history of dismissing patient concerns and bullying families who questioned his judgment. His reputation as a rainmaker had shielded him from scrutiny for years, but now the dam had broken. The story, as these things often do, leaked. A medical journalist, tipped off by a sympathetic nurse who had witnessed Dr. Hansen's courage, began to poke around. The journalist contacted Arthur, who after consulting with Dr. Hansen, agreed to tell his story, not for fame, but to ensure no other parent would have to go through what he did. The article that was eventually published didn't just focus on Alara, it was a broader exposé on medical arrogance and the importance of patient advocacy. Dr. Alistair Finch's name was dragged through the mud. He was suspended from his surgical duties pending the full investigation. His papers were re-examined, his methods questioned. The pedestal he had built for himself over decades of ambition crumbled into dust. His downfall was a direct result of his own hubris. He had underestimated the quiet watchmaker, seeing him as an ignorant obstacle rather than a determined father. He had dismissed the junior fellow, seeing her as an irrelevant subordinate rather than a woman of immense integrity. He had believed himself untouchable, and that belief, more than anything else, was what destroyed him. In the end, justice was served, not with a dramatic courtroom verdict, but with the quiet, methodical turning of institutional gears. Dr. Alistair Finch was forced to resign from the hospital in disgrace. His name, once a byword for surgical brilliance, became a cautionary tale whispered in the medical school hallways about the dangers of ego. He never published his great paper on the caudal appendage case. His career, for all intents and purposes, was over. For Arthur and Alara, however, life began anew. Dr. Lena Hansen, whose bravery had been lauded by the hospital administration, personally took over Alara's case. She became a trusted friend and guide for the family. Following her expert advice, they chose the path of watchful waiting. They monitored Alara closely, performing regular checkups and scans. Her little tail, the source of so much conflict and fear, was simply a part of her. As she grew, it did not. It remained a small, benign feature, causing her no medical problems whatsoever. The dire predictions of social torment that Dr. Finch had used as a weapon never came to pass. Arthur raised his daughter in a home filled with love and acceptance. He taught her that being different was not something to be ashamed of, but something to be celebrated. He told her the story of her birth, not as a tale of deformity, but as the story of a father's fight for his child. He framed Dr. Hansen as a hero, and Dr. Finch as a lesson in what happens when people forget to be kind. When Alara was 7 years old, she decided on her own that she wanted the tail removed, not out of shame, but out of simple practicality, as it sometimes got in the way when she sat. By then the procedure was incredibly minor and safe. A skilled plastic surgeon, recommended by Dr. Hansen, performed a simple outpatient surgery. The physical evidence of her unique birth was gone, but the story remained, a foundational myth in their small family of 2. We see glimpses of her growing up, a vibrant, happy child with a quick laugh and bright, intelligent eyes. We see her on a swing set, laughing as her father pushes her higher and higher. We see her at a school science fair, proudly displaying a project on genetics. We see her graduating from high school, her father in the audience, his eyes filled with tears of pride. He had not just saved her from a risky surgery, he had protected her spirit. He had fought a dragon for her, and the dragon had been a man in a tailored suit. His quiet strength had been her shield, and his victory was seeing her thrive, whole and unscarred by the battle he had fought on her behalf. 39 years, a lifetime. The grainy, fearful memories of that 1985 hospital room have faded, replaced by a rich tapestry of a life well lived. And what of the baby with the tail? How is Alara Jensen now? Today at 39, Dr. Alara Jensen is a highly respected pediatric psychologist. Her office is warm and inviting, filled with colorful drawings from her young patients. She specializes in helping children with physical differences and chronic illnesses navigate the social and emotional challenges of growing up. Her empathy is not just learned from textbooks, it is etched into her very soul. She is brilliant, compassionate, and has a reputation for connecting with children in a way few others can. She often shares a sanitized version of her own story with her patients and their parents, not for shock value, but to instill hope. Difference is not a deficit, she tells them, her voice warm and steady. It's just a different way of being. Your job, she says to the parents, is to be their fiercest advocate. Your voice is the most important one in the room. Her father, Arthur, is now in his late 60s. His hair is silver, much like Dr. Finch's once was, but his eyes are warm and kind. He still fixes watches in his small shop, his hands as steady as ever. Every week he has lunch with Alara. They talk about her work, his customers, their lives. The bond between them is a silent, powerful thing, forged in that crucible of fear and love, all those years ago. They never speak of Dr. Finch. There is no need. His memory is a ghost that was exorcised long ago. Instead they talk of Dr. Hansen, who remains a cherished family friend, now a grandmother herself. Sometimes, when looking through old photo albums, they come across a baby picture, where the small bump at the base of Alara's back is visible. They don't shy away from it. They smile. It is a reminder, a symbol. It represents the arrogance they faced, the courage they found, and the quiet triumph of a father's love over a doctor's pride. It is the scar from a battle they won, a battle that shaped the remarkable woman she became, and solidified the unwavering hero he had always been. The final chapter of this story isn't about a medical anomaly. It's a profound lesson in humanity. It is a story that proves that you don't need a loud voice to make a powerful point. You don't need a medical degree to know what is best for your child, and you don't need to accept the narrative that powerful people try to write for you. True strength is found in quiet conviction, in the courage to ask questions, and in the unwavering, unconditional love that can and will move mountains, or in this case, stand down the most formidable of giants. Remember this story the next time you feel small or powerless in the face of authority. Remember Arthur Jensen. Your voice has power, your love has value, and your fight for what is right is always, always a fight worth having.